Question 3 is our first large mark question. This question is worth 15 marks for your paper. So it's the first one that has got a significant amount of marks awarded for what you write. It's a fairly substantial question, but one that you will be the most familiar with. This is a skill that we work on lots and lots and lots in our English study. And so therefore it should be one that eases you into the rest of the paper. You will have done a question like this on paper 1, where you would have looked at language and structure in a creative piece of writing. However, this is non-fiction, and sometimes that can feel a little bit more difficult to pick out. So we need to think carefully about this question. So question 3 will always be worded in the same way. It is always going to say to you to analyse how the writer uses language and structure to interest and engage the reader. It will then give you these 3 bullet points. In your answer, you should write about language features and techniques, structural techniques, and the effect on the reader. It will then remind you to support your views with detailed reference to the text. That means that you have to use quotations and analyse them. In the mark scheme, which I'm going to pop up on the screen in a second for you, one of the things that examiners are told when they are looking at your writing in this question is that we have to be aware that you may structure your responses in different ways. It tells us that there should be sufficient evidence analysing both language and structure in order to reward a response. Responses that are unbalanced cannot access level 3 or above, where analysis of both language and structure is required. That means that if you do not write about language or you do not write about structure, you cannot get more than a level 2 mark. And that's really important. So what I want you to do now, before we've even looked at the question, is next to this question, you need to write language and structure. You need to write that now in this space here. Write the words language and structure, and then we're going to look at the mark scheme. Let's take a look at this mark scheme in a little bit more detail. I just want to read this box here to you because this is the general advice that is given to examiners before they start looking at this question. And so for AO2, we're looking for candidates to explain, comment on and analyse how writers use language and structure to achieve effects and influence their readers, using relevant subject terminology to support their views. Let's put that into more student-friendly speak. This mark scheme works on a levelled approach, and in order to secure a level 3, you have to talk about language and structure. We're looking for you to identify a range of techniques that are used by the writer to create an effect. This means, what are they doing to make you feel something when you're reading this? Often the most tricky part of this is knowing what we mean when we say structure. When we consider structure, we are looking at how the writer moves us through the text. What are they making us look at? What do they want us to see? How do they want us to feel? We might talk about what they focus on at the start and how they develop this. We might consider if and when dialogue is introduced, or if the focus has shifted from person to person. We might talk about the different sentence types. For example, if there are lots of questions or exclamatives or imperatives. When we think about language, we are looking to see if there are emotive words, violent verbs, adverbs, or even figurative language that adds layers of description throughout the piece. Or it is non-fiction. Maybe it's more factual, and therefore perhaps we get a sense of authenticity or credibility because its language is fairly simple. There are relevant points that you can make as we're going through this question. In order to move up the levels and away from this idea of just explaining, we look at level 4, and level 4's key word is exploration. We're exploring how both the language and structure are used to achieve those effects. We're thinking about the selection of references being detailed and fully supporting your points. We're looking for synthesis. So are you using 2 or 3 quotations to support the same point and really develop your idea in a lot more depth? So we're not just picking out lots of examples and making a point and moving on. And when we move into that level 5, we're really getting into that analysis. We're nitpicking. we're looking to delve right into that language and consider how it is really working for the writer and communicating their ideas. Question 3, and we're going back to the whole text here. So the first thing to draw your attention to is this section here. And this section here, which is in italics, you can see at the top, you can see that I'm boxing it in, is information about the text. And whilst it's useful and important that you read it and understand it, you can't use it in your response. You mustn't quote from it, because you won't get credited or rewarded, because it's actually separate to the rest of the text. So the information that we're given is that this is an extract from Born Free by Joy Adamson in 1960. And it tells us that this is a series of letters published in Joy Adamson's book. George Adamson writes to his wife to update her on the progress in returning Elsa, the lion they have raised, to the wild. Joy and George rescued Elsa as an orphaned lion cub, but decided to return her to the wild when she became an adult. Interesting information, but not information that we can actually use in our answer. However, it does explain this very useful and interesting structural point, which I'm going to highlight here in orange. And that is that we have got a series of dates. We can see one here and we can see one slightly further down. Now that is an interesting point, isn't it? Because it's giving us a sense of time. So when we're talking about structure, we can see that we have a sense of time, which I'm just going to note to myself. We have a sense of time. Because if we are making that structural point, one of the things that I can talk about when I open my my essay on how the writer is using language and structure is that the writer chooses to open with the specific date to place us as a reader with them on the 5th of March in 1959. As I've been reading this text and looking at this sense of time that we started with, I've noticed how many other time markers that we see. And so this is something which I'm going to pick up on now. We begin the text with, I was able to get off to see Elsa on the evening of the 25th, 15 minutes after my arrival. She then appears and it carries on. If I look down to this paragraph, we then get, when I bought her meat on Sunday morning. The next paragraph opens with, I left Elsa on Tuesday. And then we get the next time, which I highlighted earlier. And then we get, I went again to visit Elsa on the 14th. I arrived about 6:30 p.m. And it then continues. It gives us another time. Got into camp at 9:15 a.m. We then get a quarter of an hour later. And then we still get, as we get to the bottom, she settled down and she spent most of her days with me. So there is clearly a development of this semantic field of time used to structure the text. So I'm just going to pop this in this little space that I've got here, just again to make a note for myself. So we have got a semantic, S-E-M-A-N-T-I-C, a semantic field, F-I-E-L-D, a semantic field. Remember, that is a collection of words across a piece of text that are all connected to the same idea. So I have a semantic field of time used to structure the text. And that is a fantastic point that I can make, and I can select my evidence because I've highlighted it. But we have to think about what is the effect. So what is the effect of this? And I think that the writer is using this semantic field of time in order to create a sense of anxiety. It is like time is running out. Although it's a chronological account of their time with Elsa, there is that sense of time ticking by. We know from the start that they are releasing her back into the wild. And this sense of time moving past quite quickly in a very short amount of text gives us that sense that Elsa is beginning to become more and more wild as the text progresses. And as a reader, that makes us feel quite anxious for Elsa. Is she ready to go into the wild? Is she ready to be released? And also the sadness that accompanies that for Joy and George, who have obviously raised this cub until she's ready to be released. And therefore there is that growing sense of sadness, which I'm going to add to my notes. Sadness for George and Joy. So that's the next point that I'm beginning to think I can open my response with. We have a sense of time. It's established as a series of letters. And then we can build through to say that across the text there is a semantic field of time which is used to help structure the text. And the effect on the reader is that it creates a sense of anxiety for Elsa and her well-being, and a sense of sadness for George and Joy. So now we've made quite a nice structural point about how this text moves through the time. We need to zoom in and actually really begin to look at the language. And I've started to highlight in green this sense of the fact that Elsa has got many human characteristics. As a technique, we actually call this anthropomorphism. And we spell that, and I'm going to write it here so you can see it. We actually spell it anthro, okay, so A-N-T-H-R-O, P-O, morphism, M-O-R-P-H-I-S-M, anthropomorphism. And that means when we give an animal human characteristics, when we're taking an animal and we are saying that they are behaving or thinking like a human. And if we have a look at what I've highlighted in green here, she made a great fuss of me. Obviously, she was much puzzled. We're getting the sense that they're treating her more like a child than they are the wild, quite feral animal that she is. Remember, she's a lioness. She's designed to hunt. And so we need to be very aware of this juxtaposition between the domestication of her as a pet, as almost like a child, with the fact that she is a wild animal and belongs in the wild. So we could make quite a nice point here for our second point, that we're looking at her appearance and we're looking at her behaviours, and we're seeing this anthropomorphism. We're seeing the fact that she is being given human qualities. And the effect here, what the writer is trying to achieve, because remember, that is always what we've got to focus on, not just pointing out these things that are happening, not just giving the evidence, but explaining the effect of this. Here we're looking at this because it shows the relationship. It demonstrates how affectionate Joy and George are. So it makes us as readers feel very invested in their relationship. We want to see how this progresses. We have what is clearly a wild animal who's been domesticated, but she's about to be released into the wild. And this anthropomorphism is used to really kind of emphasize how close they are. The fact that she has a usual routine. The fact that she refused to leave the camp. And the fact that she would choose to spend the whole day with George in the studio, again, really begins to show how close their relationship is. And so if I'm thinking about how does the writer use language and structure for effect, which is the focus for this question, I'm beginning to look at the technique that is used, which shows how affectionate their relationship is, which as a reader makes me really quite concerned about what is going to come. Because at the start of this text, the writer is taking time to emphasize how close their relationship is. So the next section that we move to here, there's a lot going on that we can talk about. Notice the change in sentence structures again. We start losing that formal language, we start losing that formality, and we start getting very short sentences which really works to emphasise the anxiety of Elsa not being where he expected her to be. I went again to visit Elsa on the 14th. I arrived about 6:30 p.m. Short declaratives, factual. Dash. That's going to really increase our anxiety. That hyphen there shows a breakdown of the formal language. There was no sign of Elsa. As soon as I read this, I felt the writer's anxiety. I'm just going to highlight that sense of something's wrong. Although it's everything they've been hoping for, they want to rehabilitate her. But the sense of there being no sign, particularly, and that's definitely one I would use as a quotation, that no sign of her really begins to get our heart racing. Is Elsa okay? Where is she? Has she been attacked? Has she survived? Will George find her? And that hyphen there really works to build in that anxiety. And then the next morning at dawn, again, that time, we didn't recognise that when we were first looking at it, but next morning at dawn, the fact that he's getting up so early, again, emphasises the panic that is rising. Next morning at dawn, I set off to look for her. Went as far as the large water pool. Notice the lack of personal pronoun there. He didn't say, I went as far as the large water pool. But if we're noticing things, we're noticing the fact that he's not put that personal pronoun in, I. He's just going straight in with went as far as the large water pool along the track where Elsa ambushed the elephant. The pool was dry and no tracks of Elsa. So there's no sign, no tracks. I returned along the top of the ridge to the car track and then back to camp along the sand behind the camp. Still no signs. And again, got into camp at 9:15 a.m. The lack of personal pronouns. This is quite a frantic letter. He's not taken the time to write formally, as we might have seen earlier on. There's that lack of detail. It's very factual, very quick, lots of short sentences. And we've got this repetition. No sign, no tracks, no sign. So if we're thinking about our techniques, we've got the repetition. The word no is repeated, and that, remember we're focusing on the effects, is all about creating that sense of anxiety and frenetic feeling that we have to this. There's a desperation in the way that he's writing, and he's desperately worried about Elsa and where she might be. Looking at the last section of the extract now, because we've kind of chunked this into three: how it was opened, how it was developed, and then finally, we're looking at this ending section, which starts with a quarter of an hour later, she suddenly appeared from across the river, looking very fit with plenty of flesh on her bones. So the fact that she was looking very fit with plenty of flesh on her bones, which if you remember, we've actually picked that out already in question 2, is that sense of relief. Almost immediately when we hear that, we see this sense of relief and how it contrasts with the earlier anxiousness of the writer, of how he felt so distressed, and we had that repetition, and now we're moving into the fact that actually she's okay. She's got plenty of flesh on her bones. She's not starving somewhere in a dry water hole. And he couples this with, she must have killed at least once since I left her 11 days before. So the way that he recognises that she's beginning to fend for herself, she's been able to hunt. But I think what's really interesting is the contrast, again, as we've already picked this out, but the contrast with the fact that she is almost tame, but then the feralness, the wildness contrasting with the domestication. We get that same sense in this last paragraph. She must have killed at least once, but she gave me a tremendous welcome. That anthropomorphism again. That's something which, I have puppies. And I come in the door even after 30 seconds of being out of the room, and they're bounding over to me and they're welcoming me as if I've been away forever. And you get that sense that that's what's happening here, that affectionate relationship that we've seen. There is a slight element of concern. She had some scars. She's obviously been in some sort of fight, probably causing struggle with her last kill. But they were superficial and had hardly penetrated the skin. She's okay. She's been in a bit of a tussle, but she's getting there. She's almost ready to go into the wild. But we revert straight away back to she settled down straight away to her usual routine. She spent most of the days with me in the studio. There's still no signs of her being in contact with wild lions. So we've got that sense of her still being very, very domesticated. So to finish this paragraph, we've got this real heartwarming moment. George has obviously set up his tent. It's a mountain tent. We get this kind of chatty, colloquial conversation now. We had some earlier formality, didn't we? And we talked about the fact that he didn't use a personal pronoun. However, now we've got this in abundance. I had only the mountain tent with me. It was a bit crowded at night with Elsa in it as well, but she behaved very well. So we get this sense here of humour, good-natured humour, almost a jovial tone. I'll spell jovial for you. It's a beautiful word. Jovial. Jovial. It means jolly and happy. And certainly at the end, considering that we've been very anxious about how this passage is going to work out, we get this jovial tone. So we get a jovial tone. It was a bit crowded at night with Elsa in it as well, but she behaved very well. And the exclamation mark there, that is an exclamative. Okay, so the exclamative, exclamative. Okay, and we know it's an exclamative because it has the exclamation mark. So she behaved well. As usual, she would wake me up several times at night by rubbing noses and sitting on me. So that real sense of playfulness and the affection between George and Elsa, it shows their bond, and it makes us as a reader who've really been through the ringer over this passage, feel really, really content, really satisfied. We're almost rooting for the relationship, even though we know it's probably in Elsa's best interest that she does return to the wild. But George ends the passage by saying, there was no trouble in leaving her. In fact, I think she's becoming more independent and does not mind being left alone, which really ends the passage. Just move that down for a second. It ends the passage with a sense of hope, a tone or a sense of, sorry, just spelled that wrong, a sense of hope. So we're moving through this passage. We're picking up on several different things. We've now annotated. In the exam, you are not going to spend as long as I have going through all this in detail. You're going to be able to pick these things out quite quickly and make those points. I'm just going to bullet point now what I would write about. You're going to make sure that you bullet point this in your extract, in your answer booklet at the same time, so that part of your homework and part of your revision, you're going to go home and have a go at writing this. So in a second, we are going to bullet point the points that we've made as we've annotated this text. Okay then, so in our answer books, we've got our pens ready, and we're just going to note down the 6 key points that we made about this text. So the first point that we discussed was this sense that it is structured through a series of letters. Okay, so write this down with me. It's been structured through a series of letters. So we get that sense of it being chronological. Chronological. We get the sense of it being chronological and factual. And therefore we experience it as it is unfolding. And that creates a sense of drama. So I'm just going to put in capital letters because that's the effect that I want to think about. The fact it creates a sense of drama. As the text develops, our second point that we picked up on was the semantic field of time. Semantic field, remember, semantic field of time. Okay, and that was used to create anxiety for Elsa from the reader, And it was to create a sense of sadness, or remember that word pathos. That's where we feel pity. A sense of sadness and pathos for George and Joy. Now, because this is a plan, I'm putting G and J. Obviously, you can write the full name, but I'm trying to save a little bit of time here. As the passage develops, our third point that we picked up on was Elsa's appearance. Okay, so Elsa's appearance. Remember, I need my apostrophe because it belongs to Elsa. So Elsa's appearance. And that sense of the juxtaposition between the wild and feral Elsa and the domesticated and tame pet. We have to remember that this is a lion cub and not a kitten or a puppy. Okay, that she belongs in the wild, and as we went through, we saw that juxtaposition. We then made a very short point, which was the short declarative, I left Elsa, which really changed the tone. Okay, so the short declarative, I left Elsa, shifted the tone, and again created that pathos. So I'm just going to put that there. I'm not going to keep writing out in full sentences. Okay, so I've got that sense of the pathos. The fifth point was the shift to increase the anxiety. Okay, and that's when Elsa was missing. And we had there the short sentences. Okay, so we had the short sentences. We had the lack of formality, primarily shown through the no pronouns. Okay, so he didn't say I did this, I went there. Okay, they were short, almost quite frantic sentence structures. And we saw that very clearly. Structures, I can't talk and write at the same time. So that very frantic sentence structures and the repetition. No signs. No tracks. Still no signs. Okay, so we saw that, and that really showed how George was getting quite upset, quite anxious about Elsa. And so we're thinking about the language and the features that are being used here, and so we can see how this is all contributing to that effect of really quite tense anxiety, that franticness, the sense of panic was coming through. And then lastly, when Elsa reappeared, we had quite a jovial and playful tone. Okay, that it ended the passage with a sense of relief and hope. Okay, so we have 6 points that we can make here. Now, in the exam, it's 15 marks. It's quite a chunky question, but you don't necessarily want to spend really any more than 20 minutes writing this. So you need to pick the bits that you are strongest at. Now, when you're reading through, you might not pick up on all of those things. If you can pick up on 4 of those 6, you're probably getting up to those 10 marks, which in reality is where we want to be. We want to be getting 10 out of 15, 12 out of 15. Okay, so if we can pick up on at least 4 of those points, you are doing really well. So we're going to move on to the next question. This recording is going to be on your Google Classrooms. It is going to be accessible for you. So if there's anything that you've missed, you can go back through it. We can also photocopy these notes for you. And then at home, as part of your revision, one of the things that you can do is go back through this and actually have a go at writing it. If you want to have a go at writing it, your teachers will be very happy to look at it for you and give you some feedback.